I never imagined a Monday morning could feel like the beginning of a nightmare. The moment I stepped into the office, something in the air felt off, like the building itself knew that today wasn't going to be ordinary. My boss, Mr. Caldwell, had always been strict, but professional, someone you respected out of fear and admiration, the kind of man who could make the entire floor tense just by walking past. But today, there was a glint in his eye that made me uneasy. "Good morning, Daniel," he said, voice warm, but there was an edge underneath it I couldn't ignore. "I need to see you in my office immediately." I swallowed hard and followed him, my stomach twisting. Something told me this wasn't about a routine report or deadline. As I stepped into his office, he gestured for me to sit, but I noticed that the door stayed slightly open. Nobody else was around, everyone was working, pretending nothing unusual was happening. "Daniel," he started, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I've been observing you for a while. Your performance, your dedication, it's impressive. But, let's face it, your image, your presence, could use a little refinement." I blinked. "Refinement?" "Yes," he said, voice almost casual, but every word carried this weight that made me uneasy. "I think it's time you experience something different. For 1 week, I want you to work as a woman." For a second, I didn't process it. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was a joke. "You mean, like, dress up? For an office event?" He shook his head slowly. "No, Daniel. Not a costume. I want you to immerse yourself. Every detail. Clothes, demeanor, speech, everything. For a full week." My mind raced. Was this some sort of HR training? A diversity experiment? But the intensity in his eyes told me it was serious. I don't understand, why?" "Because," he said, leaning forward, "understanding people's perspectives fully is part of leadership. You think you know what it's like to navigate challenges, but do you? To truly understand, you must live it. And for this week, you'll be experiencing the workplace as someone entirely different, someone vulnerable, someone judged differently. It's experiential learning, Daniel. And yes, it's mandatory." I wanted to protest. I wanted to walk out. But there was something in the way he spoke, something that made it impossible to argue. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I could. This was Caldwell, we followed his rules, always. That afternoon, I found myself standing in the office restroom, staring at my reflection. My hands shook as I held a soft blouse against my chest, a skirt laid out next to me. The fabrics felt foreign, alien, almost mocking in their delicacy. I had never imagined myself like this. Not ever. My reflection stared back at me, but it didn't look like me. Or maybe it was me, distorted. Vulnerable. Exposed. Walking through the office for the first time in heels was terrifying. Every step was a reminder that everyone was looking, judging, reacting. I could feel eyes on me, some curious, some puzzled. Whispers fluttered like butterflies through the air, and I felt my face burn. My usual confidence, the one I had leaned on for years, felt stripped away. Yet, oddly, there was a shift in the way people treated me. I noticed kindness, patience, even mentorship that I hadn't experienced before. Conversations were softer, tones gentler, but also, expectations felt sharper in other ways. I was scrutinized differently, critiqued for things that never mattered before. Every movement I made felt amplified. Every word I said carried weight. And slowly, I realized that this week wasn't just about the experiment Caldwell mentioned. It was about me seeing the world differently. By the second day, I started noticing things I'd never thought about. The way colleagues' glances could carry judgment, the unspoken rules about posture and voice, the subtle but constant awareness of how my presence might be perceived. I felt exposed, yes, but I also felt strangely alive. Like I was discovering a part of myself I didn't know existed. But it wasn't all self-discovery. The vulnerability made me a target in ways I hadn't predicted. Someone accidentally spilled coffee near me, and I caught the smirk of a coworker who clearly found amusement in my discomfort. The emails I usually ignored felt sharper now, their tones cutting deeper. The office hierarchy, which I thought I understood, suddenly became a minefield I had to navigate with caution. By the end of the third day, exhaustion had settled into my bones. The pressure of keeping up appearances, of moving gracefully, of answering emails and attending meetings while constantly aware of how I looked, how I sounded, it was relentless. I started questioning who I was underneath the facade. Was Daniel, the man I'd always been, gone? Or was he hiding, waiting for this week to end? And then came the moment that made my stomach drop completely. Caldwell asked me to join him in a private meeting. Alone. Again. My heels clicked sharply on the polished floor, echoing in the silent corridor. My heart raced. I didn't know if it was fear, anticipation, or the strange, unexplainable thrill of transformation. "Daniel," he said as I entered, "I hope this week has been enlightening." His voice had that calm authority that made my throat dry. Because the final part of this experiment isn't just about appearance. It's about decisions. About adaptability. About trust. I nodded, unable to speak, wondering what could possibly come next. "Tomorrow," he continued, "you will present a client pitch, completely as the woman you've been this week. Full responsibility. No safety nets." I felt my chest tighten. Me. Leading a pitch. In this persona. Panic surged, but beneath it, a strange spark of curiosity ignited. Could I really do it? And more than that, could I survive the judgment, the scrutiny, and the inevitable laughter if I failed? I left his office that day feeling a mix of terror and anticipation. Every reflection in the glass walls of the office, every glance from a coworker, every footstep in heels reminded me that the line between fear and transformation was thinner than I had imagined. And I knew, deep down, that by the end of this week, I would not be the same person who walked into this office on Monday morning. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, heart pounding. I stared at the clothes laid out the night before, the soft blouse, the skirt, the heels that now felt like instruments of both empowerment and punishment. I couldn't shake the dread, but at the same time, there was a curiosity I couldn't ignore. What would it feel like to walk into the conference room, pitch in front of clients, as someone completely different? I dressed slowly, methodically, each piece of clothing a reminder of how alien this world felt. I practiced walking in heels, tried to soften my voice, tried to make the reflection in the mirror smile back at me instead of judging me. But the Daniel I had known, the confident, composed, self-assured man, was faltering. I was stepping into uncharted territory, and it was terrifying. Arriving at the office, I felt every eye on me. The whispers were more subtle now, but the energy of curiosity and judgment lingered like a heavy fog. Some colleagues offered smiles that were either supportive or patronizing, I couldn't tell which. And then there was Caldwell, leaning against the doorway with that inscrutable expression of his, calm and calculating. "Ready?" he asked. His question was simple, but the weight behind it made me falter. I think so," I stammered, unsure if I could even fake confidence anymore. He nodded and gestured toward the conference room. "Your clients are waiting. Remember, Daniel, this is about your adaptability, your empathy, your ability to command presence under scrutiny. Just be yourself. Well, the yourself you've become this week." As I stepped into the room, I realized that everything felt amplified. The lighting, the furniture, the way everyone's eyes followed me. It was like stepping into a performance where the stakes were real life. The clients looked at me expectantly, and I felt a momentary spike of panic. But then I remembered Caldwell's words, "Be yourself." I started the presentation, voice slightly higher than usual, but surprisingly steady. Each slide, each word, each gesture felt like a tightrope act. I could feel the awareness in every pair of eyes, the subtle judgment, the curiosity, the skepticism. And yet, something remarkable happened. By the middle of the pitch, I noticed the clients leaning in, nodding, engaged. The persona I had been forced into, it was working. The confidence I had buried was emerging in a new, unfamiliar form. After the meeting, the applause was muted but genuine. Caldwell's eyes met mine across the room, and for a split second, there was approval there. But it was not just about approval, it was a lesson. I realized I had just survived something I never imagined, and in the process, I had discovered a side of myself that was adaptive, resilient, and capable. But the week wasn't over. The following days tested me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Small humiliations, microaggressions, and subtle office politics became sharper. My co-workers adjusted their interactions, some supportive, some dismissive. There was the marketing team member who rolled her eyes at my suggestions in meetings, the junior associate who whispered critiques behind my back, the HR assistant who watched me with an unreadable expression, measuring my every move. Yet amidst this tension, there were moments of unexpected solidarity. One of the senior female colleagues, Lisa, pulled me aside after a meeting. "I know this isn't easy," she said quietly, "but you're doing more than you think. People notice resilience, even if they don't say it out loud. You're handling this better than most would." Her words struck me deeply. Here I was, feeling exposed and vulnerable, and yet someone saw my effort, not the facade, but the courage behind it. For the first time that week, I felt a flicker of pride amidst the fear. Maybe this wasn't just about humiliation. It was about perspective, empathy, and personal growth. By Thursday, the week had taken a toll on me. My body ached from heels, my voice cracked from forcing politeness into unfamiliar tones, my mind felt stretched thin from constant self-monitoring. Yet, I also began to notice subtle changes in how I carried myself. My gestures were softer, more deliberate. My listening had sharpened. I noticed expressions, body language, subtleties I had overlooked as Daniel. I realized I was starting to understand what Caldwell had intended all along. Then came the moment I didn't see coming. During a casual lunch, one of my closest co-workers, Tom, laughed as he recounted an office joke. But then he glanced at me, pause in his voice, and said, "You know, you're handling this really well. More than I expected." There was sincerity in his eyes. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a joke or an experiment. I felt human. Like someone who had survived, adapted, and learned. But the challenges weren't over. Friday brought the ultimate test, a company-wide presentation where I was expected to take the lead as the persona I had been living in all week. The entire office was there, senior management, clients, everyone. My heels clicked on the polished floor, echoing in my ears as I walked to the podium. I took a deep breath and remembered every step, every lesson, every glance, every whisper of doubt that had led me here. And as I began to speak, something incredible happened. I wasn't Daniel pretending to be someone else anymore. I was present, confident, authentic in a way I hadn't been before. Every word carried authority, empathy, understanding. Every gesture was deliberate, grounded, and commanding. The room listened. People nodded. I could see admiration, surprise, respect, even from those who had doubted me. By the time I finished, the applause was genuine, loud, and sustained. Caldwell's expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. I had made it through, survived the scrutiny, the challenge, the vulnerability, and emerged stronger. But more than that, I had learned. About myself, about others, about perception, resilience, and empathy. As I left the room, a wave of exhaustion and exhilaration washed over me. My body ached, my mind buzzed, but I also felt transformed. The week had changed me, not in the clothes I wore, but in the perspective I carried, the courage I had found, and the understanding I had gained. And yet, in the back of my mind, one question lingered. Daniel had survived the week, but who exactly was Daniel now? And could I ever go back to being the person I had been before this experience? By Saturday morning, the office was quiet. Most people had left early, but I was still there, lingering in the empty workspace, reflecting on the week. The heels that had once felt torturous now seemed familiar, like extensions of my body. The blouse and skirt that had seemed alien were no longer costumes, they were part of my routine, part of the new rhythm I had learned to inhabit. But despite the confidence I had discovered, there was an unease that gnawed at me. I caught myself staring at my reflection in the glass wall, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. The person staring back was a version of me I barely recognized. Strong, poised, aware, but still undeniably Daniel. It was a strange mixture of empowerment and disorientation. I had changed, but who had changed me? Was it Caldwell, or had I discovered this part of myself on my own? The phone buzzed on my desk. A message from Caldwell: "I'd like to see you one last time before the week ends. Office. Now." My stomach sank. One last meeting. I already knew what it meant. He wasn't finished. I straightened my blouse, adjusted my skirt, smoothed my hair, and walked toward his office. Every step was measured, every click of my heels a reminder of the journey I'd survived. Caldwell was waiting, seated behind his desk, hands folded. He looked calm, but there was intensity in his eyes that made me nervous. "Come in, Daniel. Sit." I obeyed, heart pounding. He gestured toward a chair opposite him, and I took it, careful to cross my legs properly, remembering every lesson I had learned this week. "Congratulations," he said simply. "You've completed the experiment." I blinked. "So, that's it. The week is over." He shook his head. "Not exactly. The week is over in terms of the schedule, yes. But the lessons? They've only just begun. How you felt, how you acted, how you perceived yourself and others, those experiences are yours to carry. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I nodded slowly, still processing. "I think so." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "Good. I also wanted to ask you, what did you learn? About yourself, about others, about this office?" I paused. The words weren't easy to find. I learned that perspective matters. That people judge differently than I ever imagined. That vulnerability isn't weakness. And that I can adapt. That I can survive scrutiny and still be me. Or at least, a version of me I didn't know existed. Caldwell's expression softened, just a fraction. "Exactly. That is why this was necessary. Many people believe they understand others, but until you walk in someone else's shoes, literally or figuratively, you'll never truly know. You've gained empathy, awareness, courage." I exhaled, a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The week had been grueling, physically, mentally, emotionally, but it had also been transformative. I realized I had grown in ways I hadn't anticipated, discovering patience, poise, and inner strength I didn't know I possessed. Then he added, almost casually, "There's one more thing, Daniel. I want you to decide, what part of this week do you keep? Your skills, your perspective, your confidence, and yes, even the wardrobe, if you want. Or do you shed it all and return to exactly who you were?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Could I go back to the Daniel who was oblivious to subtle office politics, unaware of how women were judged, unaware of the resilience required just to be noticed? Could I really step back into that version of myself and forget the lessons, the fear, the small triumphs, the self-discoveries? I realized then that the experiment had changed me irrevocably. I could never unsee what I had seen, never unfeel what I had felt. The vulnerability, the exposure, the constant awareness, it had reshaped me. And as much as part of me ached to shed the persona and return to old habits, another part, stronger, wiser, more aware, was determined to keep what I had earned. I met Caldwell's gaze. "I think I'll keep it. Not the clothes, not the week exactly, but the lessons. Everything I've learned. The confidence, the empathy, the awareness. I won't forget how it felt. And I won't forget what it taught me." He nodded approvingly. "Good. That is the mark of true growth. You didn't just endure, you transformed. And that, Daniel, is why this experiment mattered." As I left his office, the empty corridors of the office seemed different. Not intimidating, not judgmental, but full of possibility. I walked past my co-workers' desks, no whispers now, no subtle glances of scrutiny. The week had ended, but the changes remained. I realized that some had noticed. Small nods of respect, quiet smiles, even a sense of camaraderie I hadn't felt before. I had earned something, not just from Caldwell, but from everyone around me, including myself. That night, at home, I looked in the mirror again. The reflection was mine, but not entirely. It was layered, more complex. Daniel still existed, but alongside him was someone who had faced fear, humiliation, exposure, and uncertainty, and had come out stronger. The heels and blouse might have come off, but the poise, the awareness, and the courage stayed. And I understood something profound. The world had not changed, but my way of seeing it had. People's judgments, the subtle biases, the expectations, it was all still there, but I could navigate it differently now. I could respond, adapt, and endure. I had been forced to walk in another's shoes, and in doing so, I had discovered strength I never knew I had. By the time Sunday came, I realized that the week wasn't just a challenge, it was a revelation. I was Daniel, yes, but a Daniel transformed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could face the future with clarity, confidence, and courage I hadn't believed possible before. But even as I settled back into my old routines, I couldn't help but wonder, how much of this world, of this office, of these people, would I truly understand without stepping even further outside myself? The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. Monday came, but it wasn't like the Monday I had known. The office felt different, not in structure, not in the walls or the desks, but in me. I walked through the corridors carrying a new awareness, a new poise. The whispers and glances that had tormented me all week were replaced by subtle nods, tentative smiles, and an undercurrent of respect. People still judged, of course, but now I saw the judgments as data, as insight, rather than as attacks. I could navigate them. I could anticipate them. And most importantly, I could respond with calm, with clarity, with presence. Caldwell stopped me in the hallway, eyes sharp but approving. "Ready for another week?" he asked lightly. There was no malice in his tone now, only expectation. I smiled, the kind of smile that came from knowing I had grown, from having survived something far beyond my comfort zone. "I'm ready," I said. But not ready in fear. Ready with strength. Ready with awareness. Ready with the lessons of the week firmly etched into my mind. Throughout the day, I found myself observing everything differently. Meetings weren't just presentations. They were exercises in perception. Interactions weren't just casual chatter. They were windows into motives, fears, and expectations. I noticed colleagues who struggled to assert themselves, and I instinctively offered support. I noticed the subtle biases in conversation, and I learned to navigate them without confrontation, with tact and insight. And, perhaps most importantly, I noticed myself, how I had shifted, how my confidence had transformed, how my understanding had deepened. By midweek, the office had started to treat me differently, not because I had proven myself in the heels and blouse, but because I had proven myself in resilience, adaptability, and empathy. People who had once dismissed me now sought my input. Those who had doubted me watched silently as I navigated challenges with calm precision. And I realized something vital. The transformation Caldwell had orchestrated wasn't about clothing or posture, it was about perspective, courage, and self-awareness. The outer persona was only the vehicle. One afternoon, Lisa, the senior colleague who had quietly supported me during the week, stopped by my desk. "You've changed, Daniel," she said softly. "I don't just mean the way you handled the week, though that was impressive. I mean, you're different. You notice things. You understand things. You listen differently. People will notice, and they'll respect that." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I realized that the change wasn't superficial, it was deeper, internal. The week had stripped away facades I hadn't known I was hiding behind. It had forced me to confront vulnerability, discomfort, and fear. And in confronting those things, I had found clarity, strength, and authenticity. By Friday, the week was officially over. I stood in the office, heels long gone, back in my usual attire, but feeling anything but ordinary. I walked past Caldwell's office, and he gestured for me to enter. "You did well," he said simply. "Better than I anticipated." "Thank you," I replied, realizing that gratitude wasn't just for the challenge, it was for the lessons, for the growth, for the opportunity to see myself in a new light. He leaned back, thoughtful. Most people resist transformation, resist discomfort, resist change. But you embraced it. You didn't just survive, you learned, adapted, and became more aware of yourself and the world around you. That's rare. I nodded, a quiet pride swelling in me. It wasn't easy, I admitted. There were moments I wanted to give up, moments I felt humiliated or exposed. But I also discovered parts of myself I never knew existed. Strength, patience, empathy, confidence I didn't know I had. Caldwell's expression softened. Good. Remember, Daniel, transformation doesn't end with a week. It continues every day, in every choice you make, in how you respond, in how you see the world. Carry these lessons forward, and you'll navigate challenges you never imagined with the same grace and resilience you showed this week. As I left his office, the sunlight filtering through the windows felt different, warmer somehow. The office wasn't just a place of work anymore. It was a landscape of lessons, challenges, and self-discovery. I realized that the week had not only changed how others saw me but also how I saw myself. I had been Daniel the employee, Daniel the colleague, Daniel the man. But now I was Daniel who had confronted vulnerability, navigated scrutiny, discovered resilience, and embraced transformation. Walking to my desk, I glanced at my reflection in the glass wall. It was me, Daniel, but layered, enriched, evolved. The week had left its mark, indelible and permanent. I had learned to walk in another's shoes, to understand perspectives I had ignored, and to face the world with courage and clarity. And as I sat down, taking a deep breath, I understood something profound. Transformation isn't about who forces it upon you, it's about who you become when you embrace it. The office had been my arena, Caldwell the catalyst, but the change, real, lasting change, had come from within. And for the first time in a long time, I felt unshakable. I was Daniel. But I was more than Daniel. I was someone who had faced fear, vulnerability, and exposure, and had come through stronger, wiser, and infinitely more aware of the world and myself. And I knew, without a doubt, that nothing would ever feel the same again.